Hi to everyone who's just joined us. Right, I'll make a start. So good morning, everybody. We've just crossed over into afternoon, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's session. I'm Sean Gibb, I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at Pro Manchester, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Returning to the Workplace. What does it mean for businesses and their employees? It's hosted by the Pro Manchester Skills Committee. Following today's session, I'll send out a post-event email and it'll contain any post-event collateral, links to where you can find out about other Pro Manchester events and other collateral from our Skills Committee. It'll also contain our feedback form. If you could take just 2 minutes to fill this in, it really does help us. And I always find the most important question on us there is there's a section on there for you to give your own ideas of what you would like to see on future webinars or future even face-to-face events as we start to plan for those later in the year. So please do just take a minute to fill that in, it would be really appreciated. Just a couple of points of housekeeping. Please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. Feel free to use the chat function to ask questions, make any comments, observations. Please do interact with us, please do ask those questions and we'll address those towards the end. Please keep your microphones on mute for the time being. This gives us the best audio quality. And again, there'll be an opportunity towards the end to come off mute and ask you questions if you'd rather do that face-to-face rather than using the chat function. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Alison Loveday, partner at Kennedy's and chair of the Pro Manchester Skills Committee.
Thanks very much. I'm really pleased that you could join us today, and I'll say my thank you now to the panel. It's great that you've all been able to give up time to discuss what I think is, a really relevant topic. I think we're going to get some announcement later today about what's going to happen about our supposed coming out of lockdown, and I think there's a concern that might be being delayed for a bit longer, maybe by a month, but we'll have to see. But at some point, we have all got to address, I think, how we're going to work going forward. Is that going to be working from home 100% of the time, sometime in the office, all of your time in the office, and how best we manage the transition and maybe a different way of working? So we've got a whole wide range of questions, and I hope that we'll cover, a lot of topics during the next hour. Really, the idea for this session today came directly from dialogue within the Skills Committee, and I'm hoping today on this session we can cover the topics off both from a personal and a business perspective. So I'm going to let each of the speakers introduce themselves as we go through. But I'll start off with myself. So as Sean said, I chair the Skills Committee. I'm also on the board of Pro Manchester and on its Quality and Diversity Committee. With my work hat on, I'm based here in Manchester with Kennedy's, which is a global law firm. We've got some new space on John Dalton Street, Trinity Court, which I'm sat here in, but I'm the only person on my side of the office today in space for probably, 70 people on my bit. So that's quite eerie. With my sort of rest of my working hat on, I manage the commercial disputes team within Manchester, and I also have responsibility for other fee earners that make up our commercial division. So that's probably about 45, 50 people. And then from a work point of view, again, I also deal with employment issues. So certainly the last, however long it is, 15, 16 months, have been filled with all sorts of employment issues, not strictly necessarily sort of claims type work, but real concern how employers can support their workforce. I think health and well-being has been a key theme, getting to grips with new challenges like furlough, which is a word I hadn't even heard of up until the start of the pandemic. And then for me personally, I'm the mother of 3 children. I say children, but they're now quite grown up. So one who should have been away at university, but spent the last year spending far too much time at home with her mum, dad and brothers, which wasn't on the cards. I had a son who had his 18th last July, and so he couldn't have the party that he would have liked to have had, and he didn't do his A-levels. and my youngest son Tom has just finished not doing his GCSEs, so we did a range of other things. And so it's been interesting to see sort of their journey. I'm also part of a larger family with a mother in her 80s, so thinking about how to protect her, even though she lives quite far away from me. You know, all of these things are, I think, just an example of I'm just one person, and that's quite a lot of different competing concerns that you have to keep thinking about. So the first question we were starting off with today was, what would you say has been the biggest challenge for employees during the coronavirus outbreak? And I would say, in terms of what I've seen, it's probably, in terms of the challenge, I think it has been that mental resilience challenge. You know, some people have responded by overworking. Some people have responded by, unfortunately, getting very anxious. Some people have, I think, suffered from the isolation, where other people who perhaps are prefer it that way have dealt quite well without being having all of the interaction of a day-to-day. They've not felt isolated, whereas for others they have. So I think for employees it's a whole range of things, and I think a key takeaway from today is, as an employer, you need to be able to think. You may have a broad policy that you decide to put in place, but you need to be able to flex that to take account of people's individual circumstances, which can be quite different. And I think you're having to get to know your employees in a way that perhaps you hadn't before, to make sure that you can understand what their personal challenges are. So if I look across my screen, I can see Sarah next. So do you want to introduce yourself, Sarah, and talk about the challenges that either you and your business, or what you would say for employees are the most challenging?
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Hi, everybody. My name's Sarah Lindup, and I'm HR partner with the Alliance Manchester Business School at the University of Manchester. So I think the biggest challenge that I've found, and speaking to a lot of colleagues, I think they've found the same, particularly where people have got children or caring responsibilities, was juggling homeschooling, obviously work, and the fact that you've got all of that going on in your home. So even though things have got better and children have gone back to school, we've still got that risk, I think, of getting a phone call or an email to say, right, okay, this child's got to isolate, and then obviously that changes on a daily basis. So that's something that I've really found quite tough. And my husband was a key worker, so he was out of the house from the very beginning, and actually out of the house more than he was before. So I was left with 3 children ranging from 3 to 13. So it was quite tough. And kind of go back to what you were saying, Alison, about mental resilience. I think it really does test you. But I'd like to say that we've come through it, and I think people have managed to find a way to generally make that work. From an organisational point of view, I think one of the challenges that we've had, and we're still really battling with, is how to deliver the student experience that we would like to, because obviously university students haven't had the experience that they would like to and that they expected. And it's there are so many restrictions, and obviously the university's got to follow all the government guidelines in terms of what we can actually deliver. So it's trying to look at what options are available to make this the best of a bad situation, I guess. So yeah, they're my main challenges.
Thanks, Sarah. And Nikki, if you'd like to introduce yourself and talk about the challenges.
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, I'm Nikki O'Sullivan, and I'm the Chief of Staff for London and Manchester at BNY Mellon, based in Manchester, so one of the largest custodial banks globally. I think for me, without sort of covering, I completely agree with Sarah and yourself, Alison, in terms of some of those personal challenges. I think for me, being in an office and you know, having those water cooler conversations really, and not having the Zoom fatigue was a big thing for me. You know, being with people in meeting rooms, connecting with colleagues over the desk. So I've been back in the office only a couple of days because we're still pretty much remote, and going back in the office just for a couple of days here and there has made a huge difference. So I think for me personally, and from colleagues that I've spoken to, that's been their biggest challenge, as well as some of the items that we've addressed. I think as a company, if I think based on our staff in Manchester, so we're just shy of 1,500 staff, I think the biggest challenge initially at the start of the pandemic was really deploying everybody to work from home. And the company and the management office did a fantastic job of that, making sure that everybody had the right technology and, you know, the capabilities available. So, you know, we was quite successful really in terms of a couple of weeks deploying everybody with the correct technology who didn't have it. But it still was a challenge because it was something new. And I think when you have your resiliency plans in place, I don't think anybody could have prepared for what was actually happening at the time. So obviously our resiliency plans kicked in, and the staff was great. But I do think that was our biggest challenge, was just making sure that everybody was comfortable, had the equipment required, and embraced the technology. Really, I think we've all learned new skills from the technology we've used and had the time to really understand that. So I think, yeah, that would be from my perspective.
Great, thanks. So should we come to you, Rachel, for the same?
Yeah, hi everybody. Really pleased to be here and really interesting to hear everybody's experiences so far. So I'm Rachel and I work at the CIPD, which is the professional body for HR and people development. So we've got over 155,000 members working in HR, mainly in the UK. So they've been very involved in helping to guide and lead their organisation through those challenging times that we've been through. And I think what's already come through from everyone who's spoken so well so far is how mixed everybody's experience has been, but it has undoubtedly been a very challenging time for very many people. And just in terms of at an individual level, you can already tell sort of many different challenges that a lot of people have been experiencing. I mean, for me, members of my family have had, on the one hand, have had COVID, 2 were hospitalised, but they've come through it. I've got 2 elder children and 1 has had their university education really disrupted. But on the other hand, I'm working from home. I'm very used to that. I feel I've been really well supported by the CIPD, felt very well looked after, and it's been a really collaborative, very supportive experience as well. So, and I haven't had to commute 4 hours a day to get to London in the office. So it's a really mixed bag at an individual level. And that's come through a lot of the research that we've carried out at the CIPD as well. And people have already talked about the challenges to our mental health because, of course, COVID-19, the risk immediately to health was physical and obvious and very frightening. But it very quickly as well became apparent that the risks were to our mental health, or to many of us as well. And how we've been affected, yes, does really vary according to lots of different factors, such as the job and sector that we're working in, whether we've been frontline or working from home. They each bring their own set of challenges and risks to our health. Already talked about the caring and the home learning. There's where schools have been shut. That's been very challenging, that juggling experience, but also our personal circumstances. Certain groups have been known according to personal characteristics, such as age, ethnicity, whether you've got a health condition already, to be more vulnerable. And that, of course, is going to affect our mental health. And at the CIPD, when we've been surveying employees, we have found that around 4 in 10 have said their mental health and physical health, social connections have stayed the same, haven't got worse. So that's good since the onset of COVID, but around the same have said it's got worse. So again, a very broad, varied situation that's quite complex for employers to manage as we go further into easing of lockdowns, which probably won't come as quickly as we thought, certainly in England. So organisations have got a lot to take on board in terms of making sure that they're properly supporting people's well-being, taking on board people's individual circumstances and needs, and how things might have changed for them and what they want from work as well, as we go further along this journey. Thanks,
Rachel. I think Emma has dropped off. Emma's one of our other speakers. So Emma, if I'm wrong and you're on and I just can't see you, do you want to shout out?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you are. Well done. I just couldn't see you then.
No problem. Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Flynn, and I'm Head of Partnerships, Engagement and Inclusion at Transport for Greater Manchester. So I think probably without going sort of repeating a lot of what other panel members have talked about, a lot of the same experiences, but I think coming at it from a slightly different perspective and thinking about it from a sort of organisational perspective and from a transport perspective, I think there's it's been a sort of a really challenging period of sustained transport disruption linked to the government guidance, and even to the extent of sort of at times during the past 15 months actively encouraging people not to use public transport, which is obviously something that we never thought we would be doing. So complete kind of turnaround from where we've been. I think the sort of ongoing changes to guidance and needing to respond to that has obviously required from a staff perspective, a lot of resilience and kind of keeping going to make that as seamless as possible for everyone across the city region using transport. I think going forwards, having had that period, we're going to be sort of looking at how we, after a sustained period of people not using public transport, how we bring people back onto the network, how we kind of help people feel safe and confident returning to previous journeys that they might have made as restrictions ease and as more people start to travel, and that's really going to be sort of a key challenge for us over the coming months and even longer term, I think, realistically, given where we're coming from.
Okay, thanks, and we'll come back to some more sort of transport questions a bit later on. So moving on then, I think from what everybody said, all of the panellists within their businesses were able to work from home, which obviously appreciate for some businesses and sectors that's not been possible. But if we just look at the working remotely, were there any particular issues that you encountered? And also just looking ahead, what do you think the appetite is either for your colleagues or for the business to continue with at least some working from home? So if I put that to you again, Sarah, first.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of working from home, I think everybody got on board really quickly and managed amazingly well under the circumstances. But it was interesting to find out that some people didn't actually have Wi-Fi. You kind of assume that everybody set up and has Wi-Fi, and there were colleagues who didn't. So everybody, the IT department had to support with providing dongles, and some people didn't have laptops. So there were all those challenges to manage. But there is definitely an appetite for continued home working. I think some people have really embraced it and don't ever want to come back on the campus ever again. Other people, quite happy to go back to campus, but it's definitely something that's being considered. So we've had a what works survey, which over 2,000 employees were involved in, and then follow-up pulse surveys just to understand from the employees across the organisation, you know, what's been their experience, what has worked for them, what would they like to see going forward, so that we can try and support that, obviously in line with the needs of the university. So yeah, it's definitely under review.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, you've got that mixture of people that would happily continue only working from home, and then others who are desperate to get back in. So managing different people, and I think if you've got teams that need to collaborate, there's no point in them coming in thinking they're going to collaborate face to face if actually half their colleagues aren't there. So I think, but I think the survey point is a good one. And being consultative about anything we do must be right. So how about you, Nikki? What's your experience of this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, well, I guess the biggest challenge working remotely that I'm hearing from colleagues, especially initially, was the change in routine. Was a big thing for a lot of folks. So separating really their home life from work life, because ultimately we've sort of invited everybody into our homes now as well. I think that's got better as we've been in this pandemic. As long as we have, people have adjusted, they've got into a new routine, which again, on the flip side of that, when we do look at coming back to the office in whatever form that might look like, I think it's bearing that in mind, that folks are going to have to get into another new routine again of those commutes. You know, if they've got arrangements already now with childcare, etc. And I think again, just that engagement really. I do think working from home full times, you know, it has invaded our personal space. I think you've got to be really strict on yourself in terms of, you know, your cut-off times, your start times. I'm hearing a lot more people are working longer hours, which is a huge challenge because you've not got to get that train at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And I think a lot can be missed when you're not in the office together, just again on that personal level. I started a new role at the beginning of September last year, and it was really strange not to meet managers face to face, you know, in the office. Fortunately, I've been with the company quite a while, so I know, or I knew, should I say, the team that I was working with and some of the managers. But ultimately, you know, it was still a new team that I was managing, and it was still you know, new managers that I was engaging with. So I think for people actually joining a company remotely or starting a new role internally has been a huge challenge, because you've not got people next to you where you can just shout them for 2 minutes and ask them a question, or if something's on the screen, it's finding that time to connect with people. So I do feel on a personal level, things take longer to get over the line when we're working remotely from home full time, just because again, you've not got those quick, you can just grab somebody for 5 minutes in the office. So for me, that's been my biggest personal challenge. And again, of colleagues that I'm hearing, especially with starting a new role.
Yeah, and I think the whole onboarding process of individuals remotely, that's again a completely new skill, both for the people doing the onboarding and the individuals who are, you know, looking to secure those jobs and then settle well into them when they arrive. So no,
Yeah.
I agree with that. So how about you, Rachel?
Yeah, so I've already said personally, and at the CIPD, I think myself and my colleagues, and a couple are on this webinar now, have felt very well supported. I mean, CIPD has put an awful lot of effort ongoing and consistently into making sure that everybody is supported well, has the technology and the equipment and so on, so that sort of responsibility, that duty of care for our health and well-being and so on is really extended into the home environment. But obviously, as is already clear from what everyone is saying, everybody's got a different setup at home. Home working suits some people better than others. I feel it suits me really well. I've got a purpose-built office, you know, I'm really set up for it. But when we've been surveying employers at the CIPD, which we've been doing quite regularly, we have found a real positive in terms of most think that levels of productivity have been the same or better. And I think that's been quite a welcome surprise for some employers. But at the same time, we have found a lot of concern for people's mental health in terms of one of the risks of people working from home continuously full time. And those risks really have to be managed as well by employers. There has to be investment in making sure that people are aware in a really proactive way through their managers and so on of the mental health and other wellbeing support and so on that's available to them. And training for line managers, we have actually found at the CIPD that over the last year, training specifically for line managers in terms of a health and wellbeing survey around mental health has actually gone down over the past year, probably because organisations have had an awful lot of priorities to manage and juggle. But it's so important that with people working from home continuously, line managers are probably, in a lot of situations, people's only link with the organisation. So whether they can access support, whether they can get changes at work, but also what the organisation is doing to support people. All the sort of communication will go through that line manager quite often. So it's really important that managers are trained and they're confident. They can have those conversations with people, pick up on any concerns, because it can be harder to pick up on all those warning signs. So you've really got to know your team and create that kind of environment where people can reach out for help and so on. And that's going to be really important as we navigate a bit longer term. We don't exactly know when, a more fuller return for some organisations back into a physical working environment. So making sure that teams are inclusive and people are supported and so on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's that thing, isn't it, where you're saying you've gone from working from home to living at work, and there isn't that escape. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but you know, you are really seeing it, and I think we'll come on maybe a bit later to focus more on the mental health and the different skills that are going to be required of managers going forward. And you know, there's lots of research which, you know, and some of which will be the CIPDs, which will say, you know, people leave managers, not necessarily jobs. And I think it's disappointing to hear that the training for those line managers who are probably in the most pressure, they're squashed from above and put under pressure by those underneath them. You know, I think we really need to be mindful of the position that they're in and support them, as you've said. So Emma, anything you'd like to add to that part of the conversation?
I think really just to sort of reiterate the same points around the sort of challenges for new starters, particularly I've had members of my team who've started during the pandemic, and they've done incredibly well, but it sort of comes back to who you don't have those moments to kind of say, who can I speak to about this, or what's the easiest way of doing this. It sort of, I think it's all contributes to a little bit to the sort of, you need to set up a meeting to kind of discuss some of those things that previously would have been very easily dealt with just over a desk or kind of whilst making a brew, for example. So I think that's one of the sort of considerations for a potential ongoing hybrid model or more people continuing to work from home, is how to kind of get those things in place without having everyone in the same workplace. And I think another sort of particularly important consideration is that point about having how you have that sort of overarching framework or set of principles, but then needing to be able to adapt and apply those within a team or to individual circumstances as well, because there are sort of really diverse needs and requirements, both from an organisational perspective and then from individuals, and bringing all of that together is going to be quite a complex task, I think, over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving on a little bit to think about testing, isolating, vaccination, all that good stuff. So I had my second vaccine last week, so I'm now fully vaccinated, at least for now. You know, some people in some age groups are catching up, but, you know, haven't necessarily. And my understanding is that even if you are vaccinated, you can still catch COVID. So I think that means there's going to be an ongoing challenge around people perhaps being told they need to isolate, maybe feeling vulnerable until they've had the second vaccine, so not wanting to come back into the workplace, even if their employer would really like them to. And I'd just be interested to hear from each of the panelists around, you know, their experience around that. So if I start with you on that one, Emma, seems as you've been at the back for the last few.
Thanks, Alison. I think obviously the starting point will always be the sort of the national guidance and encouraging people to take the opportunities that are available to them. You know, we have a mix of people who are office based and then staff out on the network as well. So it will be very much be about adapting and encouraging based on the circumstances required for those roles and within different teams. But that's kind of, and as I think some of these things will obviously come out more as more people return, look to return to the office space. And it's, I think it's very much about how we encourage people and support people to get the support and what the vaccinations are on offer to them, and then support people where they do have individual needs and circumstances that need to be adapted to as well.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I really support what Emma just said about following that government advice, and they are carrying out some important reviews that will inform a return if their advice changes, because at the moment it's still to work from home and so on. And we are really encouraging at the CIPD organisations to take a holistic approach to health and safety and well-being in terms of managing a gradual, hopefully, return to a workplace when the time is right. And I mean, it's amazing to see the success of the vaccination rollout in the UK. But as you've already mentioned, Alison, we do need 2 jabs, and of course there are variants of concern, and we know that the first vaccination gives around 33%, I think, protection. So, you know, we can't rely on vaccinations alone in terms of keeping people safe in the workplace, and organisations really need to have a holistic approach. There are a lot of elements to that kind of framework when organisations have people back in a physical work environment. So it does mean having a COVID secure risk assessment, seeing what the most, because there will be new guidelines published as well by government. There's a review on social distancing. So we have to follow that really closely and adapt to what the latest advice is. Testing can form part of that jigsaw. It can be one element. People can take an asymptomatic test. So, but as an employer, you have to think all these things through. So if you have a testing policy, think through all the implications in terms of data protection and, you know, how you're going to manage that. You need a policy, definitely around vaccination, encouragement, a policy of encouragement, and addressing any concerns around that. So it's a complex landscape for organisations to navigate, but really important that you engage and listen to staff and support their mental well-being as well as keeping them safe.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And just listening to you, it just shows how much employers are really having to take on board. And, a good employer will always communicate well with their employees, but they probably don't have to dig around quite so much into their personal circumstances and their personal health in a way that this really does require. I mean, there's been quite a bit in the media about no jab, no job. Thankfully, there doesn't seem to be too many employers taking that point of view. But for some, there will be that concern. And I think we're going to come on, I'm going to see what Sarah's got to say on this question. But I think once we finished talking about this, I think it's most employers, I would hope, can satisfy the majority of their employees that they can create a safe place for them to come back to work. But how they get to work, so that commute, is the bit where there seems to be still quite a lot of concern. So if you could have a magic button that moved them from home into the office, people would gladly do that. But we don't have that. So I'll give you a heads up, Emma, we're coming to you next. But just before we finish on this testing and vaccination, is there anything, Sarah, that you wanted to add?
I guess, at the university, obviously, we've got students to consider as well as staff. And although, not all 30,000 are on campus, the halls of residence have still been anywhere between, I think, 50% and 80% full. So there are at least a couple of testing centres across campus. And the university does very much encourage people to take, the regular twice weekly lateral flow tests, and particularly where staff are coming onto campus, that is encouraged. And there's places where people can pick those up. The line in terms of the vaccination is that it's acknowledged that it's a personal choice, but whether staff have the vaccine or not, if the role requires, and when the time is right, then people will be expected to come back onto campus. But there's been a lot of work put in place to make sure that the university is as COVID secure as possible. So making sure that people do feel safe and understand that everything that can be put in place has been put in place.
That's great, thank you. So if we move on then to think about some of the transport issues, I just covered it off slightly by way of introduction there, Emma, that is for, I think, many employers the challenge, in that they've sorted out the workplace, but how do they reassure employees that they can get to the workplace safely? So really, anything that you think employers should be thinking about there, and really whether you think there's going to be any longer term change in people's I don't know, willingness or desire to commute on a daily basis.
Thanks, Alison. Yeah, it's been obviously we've had the work from home where possible guidance in place over the past 15 months, and we've sort of talked about today that anticipating that will remain in place, albeit waiting for that confirmation around the latest guidance from government. And alongside that, we continue to have social distancing in place on public transport, and also which means that we have sort of reduced capacity for people travelling, and people wearing face coverings as well, which is obviously the same in other spaces, I think. But I mean, that said, we do have a lot of people who have been continuing to travel to and from work throughout the pandemic, including using public transport. And there are safety measures that have been put in place and will continue on the network to help people have that confidence and feel safe travelling. So those are things like hand sanitizer stations and enhanced cleaning, and also extra staff on the network to help people and to provide advice and support whilst people are travelling. I think as going forwards, we have seen more people start to travel with the easing of restrictions around sort of leisure and hospitality, and whilst we don't quite know what's going to happen over the coming weeks, you know, that will continue to increase in the future. And I think as more people do start to travel from where there is the opportunity to, I think, sort of look at the times and the days that people are travelling to and from the workplace, there's a really good opportunity through sort of thinking about a different way of working and a different model to support using all of the space that's available on the network throughout the day. So trying to sort of leave those peak times in the morning and the evening for maybe for sectors where there is less opportunity to change that, but whether people can travel a little bit later, stay a bit longer, travel, you know, on a hybrid model. Does it have to be fixed days? Could it be different days? And I think within that, it's about how encouraging and embedding a framework that allows people to travel at different times and on different days. Just means we can sort of avoid going back to that, you know, early morning, evening peak crush, which could be something that people find difficult to deal with, given they haven't been travelling in that way for an extended period. I think also it's where there's an opportunity to support other choices. So where people are able to potentially think about cycling, for example, or even jogging to and from work, where that's a feasible option for them. You know, we have seen more people taking up cycling over lockdown for sort of journeys within their local area. So maybe how it's possible to encourage and embed some of those behaviours and transfer them into the commute as well as for those leisure trips. And there are things there that can help, like the provision of secure cycle parking, for example, or showers and facilities for people who are walking or cycling or jogging. So I think there is a real opportunity here to sort of support through a different way of working, to support those different options for employees to think about their journeys and kind of help to encourage and embed those behaviours as part of a future way of working. And I think there are additional benefits that come with that, both from a sort of a well-being perspective of people who are sort of avoiding very busy times or feel comfortable travelling by public transport, where they can maybe spend some of the time working rather than driving, for example. And also sort of from a resilience perspective for the employer as well.
That's great. I think it's a really good example of where we want to take the good things that people have experienced during lockdown and try to make sure that we can keep them going forward. And I think certainly, like the progress that we've made with remote working, you know, I've dealt with employers of all sizes and they've always been very sceptical, to be honest, about people working from home and what are they actually doing and will they be productive, and the team won't work unless we're all in. And I think people have really, you know, blown that out the water. But travel and thinking about how, you know, do we really need to have a 9 to 5 when everybody's working, you know, all sorts of variable hours, and isn't that more in line with how people are living? I think it's a real opportunity to throw everything on the table. And as I said, we can't necessarily design everything exactly as we want, but we can certainly redesign big parts of working and living, I think. So would any of the other panelists like to comment on this transport issue? Yeah, Rachel, great.
Yeah, just to say, really agree with everything that you and Emma have said. And I mean, really good to hear of the sort of safety measures and so on that transport companies are taking. I think that's really important, because when we've been carrying out research of employees about their attitudes to having that commute again and what their attitudes are to return to physical workplace, it's very clear that people's anxiety is very present in terms of those that have to carry out a commute on public transport. And whilst I think it's higher as well if somebody's got a pre-existing physical or mental health condition as well. So employers just need to bear that in mind. And I think it's important that they do take on board, as part of discussing now plans and attitudes around returning to a physical workplace, take on board that commute and what people's journey is and what their attitude and level of anxiety, if there is one, around that as well. And it will really vary, I expect. I mean, for me, I'm very glad that I don't have to do a 2-hour each way commute at the moment. I don't know what that would look like when more people travel back up to London. It's another reason, as Emma's already said, for employers to approach a more hybrid way of working, so that you can test these sort of scenarios out, and people have got a chance to test out that commute as well. So, because it's quite difficult, I think, for employers to really reassure, give reassurance about something that isn't really under their control directly. They can give reassurance about how COVID secure and how safe and so on their own workplaces, but it is still a little bit of an unknown, I think, in terms of more people getting on the trains and buses and so on. So important that organisations take that into account as well as part of that discussion about return to a workplace. And yeah, let's see it as an opportunity for people to do things differently. My husband has made use of his company bike scheme, and he's bought an e-bike, so he's doing things differently.
That's good to hear. No, I think that different approach, as you say, I think that's essentially what we need to all have an open mind. And just because it's not the way we did things in the past doesn't mean to say we can't accommodate that going forward. So Sarah or Nikki, did you have anything to add? Not really, no. Okay, let's, we've not got too much longer really now, we're sort of coming towards the close. So I think there were 2 areas I thought that might be useful to cover off. One is just really about how you have found the impact on mental health. And then if we move on from that to talk about the skills managers and employers will need for the future, bearing in mind all of the different new bits of work they now have to think about, which we've covered quite a few during the session. So if we talk about mental health, which I think is sort of linked to how resilient a workforce and an individual might be. So if I come to you first, Sarah, what have we got to say about that?
I think we have had an increased focus on supporting employees with their mental health. I suppose I've worked for the university for a long time, so sometimes you take things for granted, but we've got a lot of support already in place. So we have an occupational health department, we've got counselling services, disability advisory support service, we have wellbeing champions. There's so much available, but there has been a number of online activities and provisions that's been put in place since we've gone into lockdown, because I think it obviously everybody's aware that it is a bigger issue. And also I think Rachel mentioned before, as a line manager, it's a lot harder to have those conversations with your employees. So I haven't necessarily had a huge number of managers talking to me about being really concerned about more employees, but then they are picking up on things and not necessarily knowing what the issues are because they're not having those face-to-face conversations and they can't quite get to the bottom of what's going on. So we are doing what we can and I think there's a lot there, but obviously it is a concern. I think the longer we stay away from the office, understanding whether we are providing the right support.
Okay, thanks. And Nikki, how about you?
Yeah, I think honestly, many people have struggled throughout with their mental health. I think being isolated from friends and family, then also having to work and live in the same space definitely takes its toll. I think a quote that always comes to mind with this is, we may be in the same storm, but we're not always in the same boat. And this is really, I think, something important to consider when we talk about people's mental health and well-being. Collectively, we've all experienced the COVID-19 outbreak, but everybody's personal experience with it has been very different. And I think it's key as a company, to ensure that we have everything in place to support colleagues who are experiencing mental health issues. And again, I think from BNY Mellon's perspective, we have a number of tools and resources quite similar to some of Sarah's points around mental health first aiders, who dedicate their time, especially at the moment, remotely, to sort of tea and talk sessions, which are really informal sessions. Colleagues can connect, and it's a safe space for people to come together, just to chat and share their experiences, their concerns, what's on the mind, along with our employee assistant program, which has been key over and throughout the pandemic. And there's lots of other resources that we've got there as well. So yeah, I think it's about supporting each other. We've done a lot from a Manchester perspective as well, of sort of informal let's connect or let's chat sessions with senior leaders, senior managers, just so colleagues and staff can really, again, just talk about what's on their mind, and really aiming also at the individual contributors that might be based in Manchester that would normally sit with teams around them, but their team is remote, so maybe in the US or within the wider EMEA, so they don't necessarily have that, that team where they can connect with on the same hours. So really bringing those folks in as well, and making sure that, we've just created that safe space of people to talk to. I think longer term, I do think it is going to have an impact on people's mental health, if I'm honest, on a personal level for folks, as well as, again, coming back to the office, that's causing a bit of anxiety for people as well, because again, everybody's having a different experience throughout this pandemic. So yeah, I think it's just being there to support each other as best we can at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, is there anything you'd like to contribute to that?
Yeah, I think what I really identified what everybody has said so far, and I already mentioned, I think when we've been surveying employees, and around 45% have said they feel their mental health has got worse since the onset of the pandemic. Now, that doesn't mean that all those individuals will have developed a mental health condition, but the risks to some people are very real in terms of developing symptoms of a mental health condition. And we had official statistics from ONS released a couple of weeks ago showing that rates of depression in adults have doubled compared with pre-pandemic levels. So for some groups of people, particularly if you already had a mental health condition, the risks to developing a diagnosed condition are very real. And we find in our research that there's a lot of awareness about those risks in terms of employers and our HR professionals. There is a lot of concern, and when we asked organisations, how have you been responding and supporting people as a result of COVID-19, and the number one response was to provide better support for people's mental health. So it's really good that recognition is there. But at the same time, when we asked employers, how effective have you been at managing the mental health risks to people from COVID-19? Only just over half said we think our organisation has been effective. And so that does beg the question, really, why aren't more organisations confident that they are managing those mental health risks? And I think we have some indication in our research that shows perhaps how organisations can improve what they're doing, so they see more impact. And I think one is, I've already mentioned, better training and support for line managers so that they can support people, obviously not in a medical way, but being alert to early warning signs of distress, creating that atmosphere, as people already said, where you can have that safe conversation and seek support as well, and also be confident about referring people to more qualified sources of support, as Sarah and so on mentioned, like an employee assistance program, counselling and so on. And having that early intervention is really important, so before issues get a lot worse and escalate, but looking for the risks, so being preventative as well in your organisations. What are the main risks to people's mental health? And the social connections as well that Nikki talked about. There's a really protective effect to our well-being where you've got strong peer support, so social connections, which a lot of people thought would got worse in our research. That's really important, keeping that peer support going, knowing that colleagues are sort of there for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think in my experience with my employment sort of lawyer hat on, I found managers are very comfortable dealing with physical illnesses. So if somebody's got a broken leg, they know that they're going to be off for a fixed amount of time and then they'll be back and they might need a phased return, but everybody's comfortable talking about it, both the employer and the individual. Mental health is a completely different bag, even if you've got a well-trained manager who is, you know, being proactive and trying to pick up the signs. Quite often, individuals don't want to talk to their line manager about it. That may be they don't want to open up, they don't want to show vulnerability, they might be concerned about how that might impact their promotion prospects, all sorts of things. But as I said, you need two willing parties, I think, to manage mental health well. So it's individuals taking personal responsibility and the employer really stepping up. Because I think, I mean, it's interesting you say the points on mental health, but I think we also see it in equality and diversity. Lots of people are putting lots and lots of effort into some of these areas, but they're not convinced they're seeing necessarily a step change in the output. So I think we do have to, just as we're looking at the world of work differently, we probably need to think about how we can make sure whatever effort we're putting in is having the impact that we want to see. So I'm very conscious at the time, we've literally got a minute or two left. We have had some questions that have gone into the chat. Some of them I've covered off in the questions that I've already asked, and where we haven't, then I'll do my best together with Sean to make sure that we come back to you. So I'm just going to ask for a sort of a one-wordish answer to this final question, which is, what skills will the managers of the future need? So if I come to you first, Emma.
I think adaptability would be my word.
Okay, that's a good one. Nikki?
Yeah, I would agree with that, if I'm honest. Definitely. Okay. And flexibility. I think flexibility and an open mind. So too there.
Okay. Sarah?
If I'm going to use one word, I'll use inclusive.
Okay. Rachel?
Yeah, I think I'm going to emphasize more the behavioural, the softer skills, such as being able to show compassion, kindness, and being able to have that trust-based relationship to build all the skills that you need to have that trust with people in your team.
Okay, so we need managers who are flexible, adaptable, inclusive, and build trust. That would be very nice, wouldn't it? Be a nice place to work. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session today. A big thank you to all of the panellists. Really enjoyed that discussion, and I hope everyone that's joined us has found that useful. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, everyone, and a huge thank you to all of our guest speakers today, and thank you so much to Alison for hosting and chairing this session, and thanks to all of you for attending. As Alison said, we will just review any questions in the chat, and I'll include anything that we can in the post-event email. So thank you very, very much. Bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye everyone. Bye.